midweek Bible study and prayer time. I always, for a pastor, one of the most or the greatest blessings he gets in pastoring church is to see the faithfulness of the people. They're so faithful to come no matter what. And so I thank you for that. I got a song I want to play for you by I forgot what name of it is now. But I think Prayer Changes Thing or Prayer Changed Me or something. Play it, Dwight, for us there. We'll see what it is.
I'm amazed the King of Glory would live inside my heart. Amazed that He would care enough to give me a brand new start. There is not a reason He gave me such grace every day. I'm amazed. When I first came to Jesus, I had nothing to give. A life of broken promises, of heartaches and tears. Yet He asked me for nothing, for the love that He gave. He just came into my heart, and that's why I have to say, I'm amazed the King of Glory would live inside my heart. Amazed that He would care enough to give me a brand new start. There is not a reason He gave me such grace every day. I'm amazed. Today He is with me in the sunshine and rain. No, He will never leave me, no matter what this world brings. It's not because of my riches or of anything I have done. I had nothing to offer Him, yet He still sent His Son. I'm amazed the King of Glory would live inside my heart. Amazed that He would care enough to give me a brand new start. There is not a reason He gave me such grace every day. I'm amazed. There is not a reason He gave me such grace every day. I'm amazed.
He gave me such grace. So therefore, every day I stand amazed that the King of Glory would care about me, but He does. All right, tonight I want you to move over to the book of Exodus in the Bible, right at the very beginning of the Bible after Genesis. I talked about two ladies that we found in the book of Genesis. We talked about Eve and we talked about Sarah. Tonight I want to move us into a lady that we find in the book of Exodus. And I want to give you a little, just how you have to trust God with whatever position you get put in life or wherever you get, you have to learn to trust God. I don't care where it is, you've got to do that. Now, this is something that I've heard all my life. The hardest instrument to play in the band is second fiddle, because everybody wants to play first fiddle. And sometimes playing second fiddle You don't get the recognition that some people would like. And this was a story that the lady we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks had to learn. Now, there's a lady in the book of Exodus who, when we find her, she's about 10 to, they say, 14 years old. And her name is Miriam. Now, Miriam had two brothers that it seemed like in her life she always had to play second fiddle to those two brothers. They were the famous ones. They were the powerful ones. They were Aaron and Moses. And we all know their names. Most people in the world today, if you mentioned the name Miriam, I'll guarantee you most of them wouldn't have a clue who you were talking about or that her name was even in the Bible. But if you'd mentioned Moses, most all would know something about his name. But she became eventually one of the great respected women in the nation of Israel. She became a powerful woman, but it was a journey for her to get there. Now, she became a great public servant. She became a great lady of God, did a lot of work for God. But her and her brothers had issues. They had situations that come up with them because literally, I'll just say this, I believe that Miriam was somewhat jealous of her brother's positions. And she had a great part in their life. And eventually, because of this jealousy that she had, we will find this, God struck her down with leprosy because of that. And so as we begin to look at this lady, let's look at what brought her in there. When you go into the book of Exodus, now we have seen Abraham, the father of the Jewish people. We have seen most of the main patriarchs of the Bible in the book of Genesis. When we move to Exodus, the second book in the Bible, Exodus gets the children of Israel, gets them out of trouble, they get into trouble, and God, as always, comes and he rescues the children of Israel. Now, when we look at what has gone on here, we find that the children of Israel had been taken into captivity and stayed 400 years under the Egyptian rule. Remember that? Well, how did they get there? How did we move from all these chapters in Genesis about the great leaders and the people of Israel, all the great people they had, and they'd fought the battle and all that? How did it get to the book of Exodus? It says, let's look at it. Now, if you remember, there was a man named Abraham that he was the one that that led the children out. Well, Abraham had a grandson. His name was Jacob. Jacob had 12 sons, which eventually became the 12 tribes of Israel. The last son that was born to him was a young boy named who? The coat of many colors. Joseph. Coat of many colors. Well, we know this story. Joseph he could interpret dreams. Joseph was put in a pit, or going to be killed by his brothers, but this is the timing of God. God didn't let that happen because God had a plan for Joseph. God got him out and he sent him where? To Egypt. The pagan land, the ruling land, the power of the world at that time was the nation of Egypt. Now we know this story. Joseph goes in there. He can interpret dreams. He gets put in prison for a rape or whatever you want to call it. It was a lie, but he got accused of it by Potiphar's wife, so he got thrown into prison. Spent many years in prison. While he was there, I'm just telling you, see how God works in people's lives. Why the King of Glory, like that song said, would put such grace in us at times. But while he was there, God put two people across his path, two prisoners that were in there with him. And they had dreams. Nobody could interpret those dreams, but Joseph had the ability to do that. So Joseph interpreted the dreams of these guys in prison. Well, one day, the Pharaoh of Egypt had a dream that troubled him. He could not figure out what it was. He'd brought those two guys back into the palace. One of them tells him what? I know a guy that can probably interpret that dream for you. You got him in prison down there. He's a boy named Joseph. Said he's interpreted a dream for me, and everything he told me was going to happen, happened in my life. So he calls Joseph up there. What does Joseph do? He interprets his dream. What's his dream? There's a famine coming in the land. There's going to be 6 good years, and then there's going to be a bad year. Joseph helps him. Joseph becomes the prime minister. He trusts him because he was able to interpret the dream. And when he's told him what the dream was, he could help him. So he put him in charge of the land for the next 6 years. And he told them what they needed to do to prepare themselves for that 7th year when there would be no food, there would be no stuff. And Joseph led them through this. Well, all that is good. But I'll tell you, life is an ever-changing thing. God never meant for life to stay the same with us. You've never read anybody in the Bible to give any detail about their life where it remained the same all the way through, did it? So, as long as that Pharaoh was living, as long as Joseph was living, tell me about the Israelite people. They had it made, didn't they? Life was good. They'd been given the best land. They had been taken care of. Everything they had been needed had been primed. But this is what happens. Life changes. Different people come into your life, make a difference for good or bad. Other people come into your life, make a difference for good or bad. Well, the guy that took the place of the Pharaoh there when Joseph went there, he was a bad dude. It was going to change the children of Israel's lives forever. But it would also change the nation of Egypt forever too. So when you look at this, let's look at verse 7 in chapter 1 of Exodus. The children of Israel were fruitful, increased abundantly, and multiplied, and waxed exceeding mighty, and the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king. That's what I was telling you. New man comes in charge. I've heard this all my working career and in life when I worked, did electrical work, and this was an old saying that I knew that, and I found it to be true many times, and I found it to be true in my life. When a new man gets in, what they say, a new broom sweeps clean. I've been there and done that. I've been swept clean before. So I know that that's a true fact, that happens. And so this is what happens. There rose a new king, which knew not Joseph. What that means is what? He'd never heard of this man. He didn't know that this man was the reason that land had been successful, that those people had been successful, that this was the man that had done that. But he said unto his people, behold, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. The thing when he took office that got his attention more than how well the country was doing, how prosperous it had been, was the fact that the children of Israel, now I don't know how they did this. I know we have people that do censuses every year and try to find out how many different people there and all that, but somehow or another it was brought to his attention. The Israelite people They live in the best part. They own the best land. But more than that, they're growing, and their population is growing much faster than ours is. And if something isn't done with them, then they will take over. That's what he sees. Therefore, so he says in verse 10, so come on, let us deal wisely with them. Key word there, wisely. Man's wisdom is nothing like God's wisdom. What man calls wise sometimes, God calls foolish. He said, let's be wise about these people. Let's do what's for them and what's best for the country. What I found about most people that are in leadership positions, they tell you about they care what's best for the land and what the country, but all they really care about is themselves. And he's a prime example of that. Fear's starting to come in him. And he ain't worried about the country as much as he's worried about is he going to be able to stay the boss of the country. So, but he calls them together and says, let's get together and we'll talk about this and deal wisely with it. Lest they multiply. If they keep growing like they're growing, it will come to pass that there falleth out any war, if they join us also unto our enemies and fight against us. So we've got to get them up out of the land. So, what he says is what? There's more of them than us now. We've got a lot of enemies out there. If our enemies decide to come get us, what's going to happen if the children of Israel side with our enemies? They're going to take our country away from us. They're going to take our country away from us, is what he says. Therefore, and this was the turning point for the children of Israel right here. You remember up to this point, they had it made in the shade, son. They had the best farmland, they had more cattle, they had more people, it was just a prosperous time for them. But they set over them taskmakers to afflict them in their burdens. We don't agree with them and we're afraid of them, so what we're going to do, we're going to make laws and we're going to pass laws that's going to hurt these people here. That's going to afflict them, that's going to cause them pain because we don't like them. See, that's what dictators do. They afflict pain. And he says, so they do that, and they built for Pharaoh treasure cities, Pithom and Ramesses. So they said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to make slaves of these people. And we're going to build, we're going to use them for slave labor. We're going to work them day and night. We're going to get everything out of them, and they'll either die or they'll keep working, but if we do that, we'll expand and we'll get rid of them. That was the plan of the leadership of the nation of Israel. They made taskmakers over them. Because what? They wanted to hurt them. He said, we need to afflict them in this. That's what he said. But, there's that word. See, the but always changes things. But, the more they were afflicted, the more they multiplied and grew. They were grieved because of the children of Israel. I like that. God's plan is going to be God's plan. And I don't care if it's a Pharaoh, I don't care if it's a president, I don't care if it's a prime minister. God's plan is God's plan. God's plan will always happen. It will always happen at the right time. We might not think it's the right time. The world might not think it's the right time. But I've been instructed in the last couple of months how important the word time is in the Bible. Everything from Genesis to Revelation has been done or will be done in God's time and by God's clock, not by man's. So man thought what? We'll get rid of them. What did God say? There is no leader ever been or ever will be in the face of this world or the history of this world that even is in comparison to God Almighty. None. None. There is a God up in heaven. That God controls everything from America to Egypt to Russia to China. Hey, He got it all. Understand that. And so, it's kind of like that old scripture a little later on. And this is a good scripture. Remember a little later on in the story of Joseph? How after the famine and all of that, and they had the food and all. And remember his brothers still lived way off, those that tried to kill him. There was no food in their land. So they come in there to Joseph to get food to take back home, feed their daddy. Long story short, during this process of Joseph meeting and greeting and finally getting to know them and his daddy, this is a statement that Joseph made. What you intended for bad when they threw him in that hole and sold him. What you intended for bad, God intended for good. What a statement. So I thought about that as I was reading this and studying this. And so what Pharaoh thought was going to be bad for the Israelite people, what did it turn out to be? Good. He said they began to multiply. We thought we were going to do away with them, and the more we worked them and the harder we worked them, the more they came. And so what we wanted for bad, God turned it in for good. Nothing, listen, Brother Lee and I were talking about this. God has a will for you and for me and for this world. God's had it from day one. He knew this was going to happen. He'd already planned for it. And so instead of being devastated and being done away with, they prospered. The harder they came at them, the stronger they got. The stronger they got. The more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. That's what happened. But here's where Miriam comes into the picture. This is a plan. This is a little girl that will become a prime player in what goes on from this point on in history with the Jewish people. Remember the problem. As far as the Pharaoh's concerned, they're growing and they're prospering. How do you keep them from growing? You kill their babies. How do you keep the children from growing? You kill their babies. See, we think this thing of abortion and stuff that we talk about now is something that just come up with us. Hey, you go back to the 2nd chapter of the Bible and they kill babies. They said when they're born or before they're born, if you find they're having a Jewish boy, kill him. That's how we'll stop them from growing. This ain't a new problem here. It's always been a satanic thing. The king of Egypt spoken to the Hebrew midwives. They didn't have a hospital they could take them to. They had a midwife. They came and stayed with them until the baby was delivered. Of which the name of one was Shiphrah and the name of the other was Puah. He said, when you do the office of a midwife to the Hebrew women, see them upon the stool. If it be a son, you shall kill him. If it be a daughter, she shall live. So he sends an edict out. See, they didn't have the hospitals and stuff like we do. They had midwives that came and take care and help with the birthing of a baby. That's what they did. And so his law was to them, if it's a little baby boy, when he comes out the womb, kill him. If it's a little girl, she can live. That's what he said. But, there it is again. But the midwives feared God. And this is the old statement you hear me say all the time. If you have a fear of God in your life, you need not have a fear of man. Now, I know I'm going to be talking about Miriam, but I'm going to tell you what, often overlooked in this story is the faithfulness of the midwives there that would not kill them little baby boys. It says they feared not him. Even though their life was on the line, it says that they feared God. Feared God. And I dare say, I'll just throw this in as a little sideline. The biggest problem in America today is that the majority of America don't fear God at all. The majority of America does not even recognize there's a God. The majority of America think they've done all this and got all they've got, and they give God credit for nothing. That's our problem today. And we wonder why we are. Let me tell you why we're where we are. Because this is where God wants us to be. It don't matter who. This is where we needed to be, because God's plan and will is in action, whether we like it or don't like it. They said, we fear God. Because they said, we fear God. Let me get back to my place here. And did not, as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the men children alive. So therefore, they were in direct disobedience to the law of the Pharaoh. Their lives were on the line here. The king of Egypt called for the midwives and said unto them, why have you done this thing, and have saved the men children alive? The midwives said unto Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are lively and are delivered as the midwives come in unto them. They're not like us. They were excited. They were jubilant about having a baby. They were ready. They wanted to have these babies. It was not a burden to them. This is some. If you remember when he made Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, what did he tell them he wanted them to do? Multiply. So they were doing exactly what God wanted them to do, and they said they were not like us. Therefore, God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and waxed very mighty. So what happens? The work didn't stop them. They continued to grow. The law saying kill the little babies didn't stop them. They continued to grow, and he says in that scripture, and they became not just they became a mighty power. And it came to pass that because the midwives feared God, that he made them houses. Pharaoh charged all of his people, saying, every son that is born. Now this is where Miriam's going to come into the picture. Pharaoh said this, let them be born, instead of killing them at birth or right for birth. Let them go ahead and be born. And every son that is born, you shall cast it into the river. And every daughter you shall save alive. So he says they'll be born. They'll go to their houses. They'll have their babies. They're born. We'll find out about them. And when we find out about them, we'll take them out there and we'll take them to the river. And this is what we'll do to them. We'll drown them. We'll kill them. They might be 2 months old, 3 months old. You know one thing that's hard to do? Is keep a little baby and not let nobody else know you got it. How hard is that? But that's what these women were asked to do. If they were going to keep their little babies, their Jewish babies alive, they had to keep secret. They had to keep them quiet. They had to keep them still. They had to keep where nobody knew that they were born in the house. Because if word got out, I think there's a little baby boy in that house, they would go snatch him out of that house and they would kill him, take him to the river and drown him or whatever they do. That's what they do. I guess it was for them, it was a lot easier to kill a little child than it was to kill that baby when it was born. But they had no problem going to the house if they found out they were there and killing them. So, then comes the story. There was a man of the house of Levi who took a wife, a daughter of Levi. Now, the tribe of Levi is what? That's the tribe of the priests and stuff. 12 tribes, tribe of Levi is one of them. The woman conceived and bare a son. And when she saw him that he was a goodly child, she hid him for 3 months. Nobody except the people in that house knew that little baby was alive. 3 months. She kept him in there. Nobody said a word. They went about their business, and for 3 months, they kept him quiet. They kept him there. 3 months in that house. And when she could not longer hide him, she took for him an ark of bulrushes, dabbed it with slime, with pitch, and put the child therein, and laid it in the flags by the river's brink. In other words, this is a smart mama here. She made a basket that would float, big enough for that little baby that's 3 months old to get in that basket. She wrapped him up. She did not put him in the river. This is her wisdom, where he would float around, maybe go to the other bank or go on down the river somewhere. The Bible says that she placed him over in the reeds, where he wouldn't be washed out or washed down or something, but it would be a more steady place because she put him in there with all the stalks and all. And she also knew this, that many of the Egyptian women came to that part of the river to bathe. She also knew that Pharaoh had a daughter, that's where she came to bathe. And so she placed that little baby, 3-month-old baby, in those reeds on the side of the river there. Now, I know my time's just about gone, and I ain't got to her yet, but I'll give you a pretty good introduction to her. The next verse gets her. And his sister, who is Miriam, she stood afar off. She probably must have seen or helped her mama take that little basket, put it in the river, because she knew where that little baby was at. And she stood back away, and she kept her eye on that little basket. She watched him. She wanted to make sure that, the alligators in the Nile River. Make sure an alligator didn't get him. Make sure the wind didn't blow him out and he just go down the river and nobody ever know what he was. So she stayed afar off, and she kept a look out for her little brother. To wit, that what would be done to him, to be a witness. Because she was going to have to go back one day, someday, soon, and tell her mama what happens at that river to that little boy. So she stood afar off and she watched it, knowing that only what happens to him would be wisdom to her, other than who does what happens to him. Her name is Miriam, the older sister. They seem to think, as I read and studied this, at this time she's about probably 12 years old in there. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to wash herself at the river. Her maidens walked along by the riverside, and when she saw the ark among the flags, she sent her maid to fetch it. And when she had opened it, she saw the child. And behold, the baby was crying, or he wept. She had compassion on him and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." How'd she know that? I don't know. I can't answer that. But the minute she saw him lay in that basket in that water, she said, "That's one of the Hebrews' children there." No Egyptian mother would have taken her child and put her down that water like, why would she? Really. Then said his sister. So now, remember where Miriam's at She's standing far off watching all this. When Pharaoh's daughter sends one of her maids down there to get that little baby up and take him out of those reeds, Miriam steps out and goes to where Pharaoh's daughter is. And she says to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call to thee a nurse of the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for thee?" Pretty smart little 12-year-old girl, he ain't. I don't know if her mother told her what to say or her daddy told her what to say. I ain't got a clue. But one thing she knew was this: Pharaoh's daughter couldn't nurse that child. And back then, you couldn't go by baby formula, right? So she said, "Let me help you out here. You've already said that this little baby is a Hebrew baby. So I probably know some Hebrew ladies, I'm raised up in them where we live at, that can probably nurse this child for you and raise this child up." This is Miriam, now 12-year-old girl, having this conversation about her little brother Moses. I think she's pretty smart in how she deals with it. Like I say, I don't know if she was taught this or what happened. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." Maid went and called who? Child's mama. Who was who? Her mama. She said, "I know just the mama." She didn't tell Pharaoh's daughter this, but I'll get my mama to do it, because that's my little brother down there. She knew that. Pharaoh's, let me tell you how things get better. Let me tell you how God really works. Now, number one, let's listen. The little baby's saved from the river. Number two, he is saved by the most powerful people in the world, the Pharaohs. Rich, money, well-to-do. He ain't going into a poor family. He's going into the wealthiest family probably ever lived on this earth. And thirdly, his mama was going to get to raise him. Raise him. And it's going to show up later in his life. So Pharaoh, and all of this is another thing happened. She said, "Little girl, I like your idea. If you know somebody that can take care of this little baby, you go ahead and do it." And then she said something else. See, God, don't you see God all over this right here? You don't see God's, man, let me tell you. She said, "Take this child away and nurse it for me. Give it, and I will give thee thy weight." Hey, not only do I want you to take this child and feed it, I'll cover all the expenses. Whatever it takes to raise this little boy up to where he can come live with me, you just send the bill to me. Wow. Wow. And the woman took the child and she nursed it. And the child grew. And she brought him unto Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. And she called his name Moses. And she said, "Because I drew him out of the water." So, you get a little snippet of Miriam here. How even as a 12-year-old or 13-year-old girl, she was wise beyond her age, had conversation with one of the most powerful women in the world, the Pharaoh's daughter, convinced her to let her take care of her. Listen, what a wonderful it is. So we got the two people that we're going to be dealing with. We're going to be dealing with Miriam. But Moses is certainly going to be the intricate part of Miriam's life. And so we'll begin to look now at her and what happens later on when Moses becomes a man. So we'll be talking about that. All right. Thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate it. God bless you. I hope you have a great week, rest of the week, and thank you for your prayers.